Witches. The absolutely true tale of disaster in Salem. By Roselyn Schanzer. Chapter 4. Witch Hunt. So did the afflicted girl's fits stop once the suspected witches were safely under lock and key? Not on your life. And almost every day, more and more people claimed that they were under attack. Those first 3 arrests had marked a tipping point. The witch hunt would now begin in earnest. By March, practically everyone was starting to panic. As skies faded from gray to black on the night that Tituba, Good, and Osborne were sent back to jail, 2 men thought they saw a shadowy beast crouch down upon the ground and then spring up and up into the sky, where it split apart into the 3 spirits of the jailed women and vanished. The very next night, one of these terrified fellows was followed by an enormous white dog. He raced home to his bedroom, slamming the door, and dived under the covers to hide. But just then, a large gray cat appeared in a ball of light right in the middle of the bed, and the second man thought he kicked Good Spirit off of his own bed. Dr. Griggs's niece, Elizabeth Hubbard, cried out that she was being stabbed by the furious spirit of Good, who stood atop her uncle's table, quote, with all her naked breast and barefooted and bare-legged. "Oh, nasty slut," yelled Hubbard. "If I had something, I would kill her." Nobody else in the room saw the thing on the table, but Elizabeth's uncle grabbed up his cane at once and swung it valiantly through the air in an attempt to smite the invisible witch. "You have hit her, right across the back," Hubbard exclaimed. Then, Ann Putnam Jr. singled out 3 more witches. First was the Spitfire spirit of little Dorcas Good, Sarah Good's 4-year-old daughter, who supposedly used inhuman strength to pinch Anne, to choke her, and to try and make her sign the devil's book. Next, Anne accused a gospel woman who was a member of the village church. Her name was Martha Corey. Gospel women were reputed to be the most zealous church members of all. But even though Corey was a well-liked member of the Puritan religious elite, certain people still disapproved of her because she had once borne an illegitimate mulatto son. Now, she had made a major mistake. She had told people she thought the witch accusations were nonsense. Martha was the second wife of an 80-year-old farmer named Giles Corey, and she had fought to keep him from going to watch the questioning of Good, Osborne, and Tituba by taking the saddle right off of his horse. The cantankerous old man didn't care. He went anyway. When Church Deacon Edward Putnam, Anne's uncle, and courtroom scribe Ezekiel Cheevers went to Martha Corey's house to question her, she said, "I know what you have come for. You are come to talk with me about being a witch. But I am none. I cannot help people talking about me." But Anne soon exclaimed that Martha was trying to make her bite off her own tongue, that an invisible yellow bird was sucking a spot between Martha's fingers, and that she had seen a spectral man being roasted on a spit by a spectral Martha Corey. The third witch Anne incriminated was Elizabeth Proctor, who had been under suspicion for years because her grandmother was supposed to have been a witch. And who else would rake coals over the reputations of Martha Corey, Elizabeth Proctor, and even Elizabeth's husband, a big burly tavern keeper named John Proctor? It was the Proctors' very own 20-year-old servant, Mary Warren. Now, why would she do that? Was she truly ill? Was she terrified by dark shadows in her chambers? Or was she out for revenge against her hot-tempered master? Warren had been having, or faking, fits at earlier hearings and claimed that she was afflicted by the specters of Martha Corey and John Proctor. Proctor was so furious at his servant for incriminating innocent people that he had threatened to thrust hot tongs down her throat. From the very beginning, John had never believed that anyone was a witch, and he thought the self-proclaimed afflicted people should be sent to the whipping post. His attitude infuriated Betty's father, Reverend Parris, Anne's father, Thomas Putnam, and other people who lived with the afflicted. John and Elizabeth Proctor had 5 children together. 2 months after the Proctors were arrested, one of their daughters and 2 of their sons were taken into custody too. The next person to join the growing list of accusers was Ann Putnam Jr.'s 19-year-old servant, Mercy Lewis. After taking care of Anne for 2 weeks, Lewis started having fits herself. She was being choked, blinded, stuck with pins, pulled by strong forces into a blazing fireplace. And Lewis said it was all the fault of Martha Corey, the very same gospel woman that Anne had already accused. Like Anne, Lewis claimed that she saw Martha Corey's spirit roasting a spectral man on a spit inside her fireplace. When Lewis struck at Corey's spirit with a stick, she suffered grievous pain herself, supposedly because the spirit was hitting her with an iron rod. And besides Martha Corey, wealthy Elizabeth Proctor was out to bewitch Lewis too, or so Lewis said. Could the girls have really seen such spirits? Or did they get their story from Cotton Mather's scary book? Mather had written that an 11-year-old boy said he was roasted on a spit by a witch back in 1688. Or was Lewis remembering what she saw or heard about during the Indian Wars, when she used to live in Maine? The Wabanaki Indians had supposedly roasted captive settlers alive over slow fires then. Or was another kind of mischief afoot? On Saturday, March 19th, the High Sheriff of Essex County arrested Goodwife Martha Corey. When she was questioned 2 days later, Judge Hawthorne grilled her harshly from the start, constantly accusing her of lying. Corey: "Pray, give me leave to go to prayer." Hawthorne: "We do not send for you to go to prayer, but to tell me why you hurt these children." Corey: "I am an innocent person. I never had anything to do with witchcraft since I was born. I am a gospel woman." At that, Ann Putnam Jr. cried out. Corey was no gospel woman. She was a gospel witch. By now, witnesses Abigail Williams, Elizabeth Hubbard, Mercy Lewis, Ann Putnam Jr., and her mother, Ann Putnam Sr., were screaming at the top of their lungs and writhing around in agony at Corey's every move. If Corey so much as bit her lip, they bit their own lips and showed bite marks and scratches on their arms and wrists too, saying that Corey's invisible powers had made them do it. And if Corey so much as wrung her hands when they accused her, they cried out that she had bruised them by making them wring their own hands. A woman named Mrs. Pope threw a shoe at Corey and hit her in the head. Anne claimed she had seen Corey praying to the devil one night outside her window. Then the afflicted girls said they could hear a drum calling all the witches to gather right outside of the meeting house. Even Martha's own husband, Giles Corey, testified against her, blaming her for some very strange things. It seems that the previous week he had fetched an ox that was lost in the woods, but it promptly laid down in his yard and couldn't get up. It just dragged its rear end as if it had been shot in the hip. Before long, though, it got up on its own. Then, his cat fell ill all of a sudden, and he thought it would die for sure. So, his wife told him to knock it in the head. He would not. And just as suddenly, the cat got well. Besides, he said, his wife liked to stay up after he went to bed. He even saw her kneeling in front of the fireplace as if she was saying a prayer. But he heard not a word. Right about that time, the children cried out that a yellow bird was sitting on Martha. When Magistrate Hawthorne asked her about it, she started to laugh. Back to Salem jail went Martha. On March 23rd, Edward Putnam, Ann Putnam Jr.'s uncle, and a farmer named Henry Kenny entered a complaint against a 71-year-old grandmother named Rebecca Nurse, who was sick in bed. Everybody loved and respected Goodwife Nurse, who had raised and educated her 8 children to become fine, upstanding adults. Besides, she and her husband, Francis, had always been faithful and loyal to one another and to their family and their religion. How could she possibly be a witch? Some people thought Rebecca Nurse's mother was a witch, so maybe she was a likely target. But was this accusation really a way to take revenge against the Nurse family? Rebecca's father had often battled with the Putnam family over their farm boundaries. Besides that, Rebecca's husband had been Salem town's constable in the 1670s. And way back then, the Putnam family was rich. The Putnams had gotten into a big legal battle with the Porters, another wealthy family, over whose timberland was whose. As constable, Francis Nurse had arbitrated their dispute, and the Putnam family lost out in the end. In all, 10 of 18 depositions against Rebecca Nurse were signed by Putnams. But 2 of the other accusers had grudges against the Nurse family as well. Francis Nurse was a member of the Salem Village Committee that voted against paying Reverend Parris's salary in 1691 in order to drive him out of Salem. And then there was the Putnam family's 19-year-old servant, Mercy Lewis. Of course, she always sided with Ann Putnam Jr. when it came to accusing people of witchcraft. But Francis and Rebecca Nurse had enough money to hire another man to take their son's place as a soldier in the Indian War. Though this practice was perfectly legal, Lewis, who was orphaned when her family died fighting in the Indian War, might have resented the Nurse's family's good luck. To make matters even worse for Rebecca and her relatives, both Ann Putnam Jr. and her mother claimed that Nurse's 2 sisters, Sarah Cloyce and Mary Esty, were also witches, and lots of other accusers chimed in. So, if the Putnam family, Reverend Parris, and Lewis were out for revenge, they were about to get it. Rebecca was taken from her sickbed to appear before the magistrates on March 24th. I can say before my eternal Father, I am innocent, and God will clear my innocency, she testified. A sympathetic audience believed her, until the victims claimed to see the devil and a whole swarm of his familiars whispering in her ear. Next thing you know, they said they spotted Nurse's specter as it zoomed past the meeting house, riding upon a pole behind the evil black man. And besides, every time she moved, the girls appeared to be bitten, pinched, bruised, or bent as if their backs were broken. I cannot help it, cried Goody Nurse. The devil may appear in my shape. Off to the Boston jail she went. The cold winds of March were fading, but still the chilling accusations flew. During Reverend Parris's church services on Sunday, April 10th, Tituba's husband, John Indian, was apparently bitten so hard by the spirit of Sarah Cloyce that he had started to bleed. Services got even more interesting when Abigail Williams insisted she saw the specters of Cloyce, Nurse, Corey, and Good, and a shining white male angel who made all the witches tremble. Claims about the suspects were getting more and more out of hand. The next day in the meeting house, Abigail made Cloyce seem like she was an enormously important and ridiculously evil witch. According to Abigail, 40 witches had taken communion together in a pasture by drinking the afflicted girl's own blood, and it was served by the two chief witches, none other than Sarah Cloyce and Sarah Good. After hearing such accusations, the real Sarah Cloyce fainted dead away. "Oh," proclaimed the afflicted girls, "her spirit has gone to prison to see her sister Nurse." Then, several girls blamed the spirits of Elizabeth and John Proctor for yanking up a spectator by her feet and for sitting upon the roof beams to harm the people below. Every day, there were more terrible tales of torment. One of the newly accused witches was Martha Corey's husband, Giles Corey. He was supposed to have used witchcraft against at least 9 people. An angry woman swore that the specter of Giles Corey murdered his first wife and would have murdered this wife too if she had not been a witch. Then, 2 people testify that Corey participated in the sacrament at a gathering of 50 witches. Ann Putnam Jr. called Giles Corey a dreadful wizard who did torture me a great many times. And whenever he shook his head at the accusers or waved his arms in frustration, all the victims shook their own heads and waved their own arms in apparent pain, crying out that Corey was hurting them grievously from all the way across the room. Ann's father, Thomas Putnam, got in on the act by writing the judge to report that Ann had seen a dead man in a winding sheet who told her that Giles Corey had murdered him by pressing him to death with his feet, and the devil promised he should not be hanged. But something very surprising happened on April 19th. John Proctor's servant, Mary Warren, said that she had been lying when she accused people of being witches. She claimed that the other girls' fits were faked and that they too had lied when they fingered people for witchcraft. The result? She was accused of being a witch herself.